Arabella Hartley had perfected the art of pretending not to hear. She stood at the edge of Lady Pemberton's ballroom, her gloved fingers wrapped around a glass of lemonade she had no intention of drinking, and listened to Miss Charlotte Fairfax's silvery laugh pierce through the quartet's gentle waltz. "Poor Miss Hartley," Charlotte said to her cluster of admirers, her voice carrying with the particular acoustics of deliberate cruelty. "With those dreadful spectacles and ink-stained fingers. Honestly, no nobleman would ever want her. Perhaps she should consider a position as a governess instead." The other young ladies tittered behind their fans. Arabella felt heat crawl up her neck, but she kept her expression carefully neutral. She had heard worse. At 26, with her unfashionable interest in astronomy and her complete lack of feminine accomplishments, she had become the subject of much drawing-room speculation. "I heard she spends entire nights on her uncle's roof and staring at the sky," another girl whispered, scandalized, "like some sort of madwoman." "Well," Charlotte concluded with false sympathy, "at least she has her stars to keep her company. They're likely the only thing that ever will." Arabella set down her untouched lemonade with trembling fingers. She would not cry. She had not cried in 5 years, not since the last man who had shown interest in her had laughingly admitted it was merely a wager among his friends. She slipped through the crowd toward the hallway, desperate for air, for silence, for anywhere but here. The library. Lady Pemberton's townhouse had a library attached to the ballroom for this charity event, supporting scientific advancement. How ironic. Arabella pushed through the door and closed it behind her, muffling the music and laughter. The room smelled of leather and beeswax. Moonlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating rows of books that stretched toward the ceiling. Arabella removed her spectacles and pressed her fingers against her burning eyes. "Damn them," she whispered to the empty room. "Damn them all." "I would suggest damning them individually," a low voice said from the shadows. "It's far more satisfying." Arabella gasped and fumbled to replace her spectacles. A man sat in a wing-back chair near the fireplace, a book open in his lap. She hadn't seen him in the darkness. Forgive me," she said quickly, already backing toward the door. "I didn't realize anyone was here." "Please don't leave on my account," he said, standing. "I was hiding as well." He stepped into the moonlight, and Arabella's breath caught. He was tall, with dark hair that fell slightly too long across his forehead, and eyes that seemed almost gray in the dim light. His evening clothes were impeccable, but somehow looked uncomfortable on him, as though he wasn't accustomed to formal dress. "You were hiding?" she asked, curious despite her embarrassment. "From the dancing, the conversation, the entire spectacle, really." He gestured to the book in his hand. "I find Herschel's Catalogue of Nebulae far more compelling than discussions of the weather." Arabella's eyes widened. "You're reading the Herschel Catalogue? I've been trying to acquire a copy for months." "Have you?" He looked genuinely surprised. "Most people find it rather dry." "Most people," Arabella said, feeling her pulse quicken with something other than humiliation for the first time that evening, "have no imagination. Herschel's observations of deep sky objects are revolutionary. His sister Caroline's contributions alone are worth—" She stopped abruptly, remembering herself. "Forgive me, I'm being tedious." "Tedious?" The man's expression shifted into something that might have been delight. "You're the first person I've met in 5 years who even knows who Caroline Herschel is. Please, continue. You were saying her contributions are worth—" "Everything," Arabella said softly. "Her comet discoveries, her catalogue corrections. She proved that women could contribute to science meaningfully, even when the Royal Society refuses to acknowledge us." "Us?" He took a step closer. "You're an astronomer?" "An amateur one. My uncle has a modest telescope. I make observations when the weather permits." "What are you observing currently?" "The Andromeda Nebula, mostly. I'm trying to sketch its structure more accurately than Messier's original drawings." She felt herself relaxing, the earlier humiliation fading like mist. "Though my equipment is limited, I would give anything for access to a proper refractor telescope." "I have a 6-inch refractor at my estate," he said quietly. "In Surrey, with a complete observatory." Arabella stared at him. You're joking. I assure you, I rarely joke about telescopes. His lips curved slightly. I'm Thornberry, a cheerful voice boomed from the doorway. There you are. Mother is asking. Oh. A younger man appeared, fashionably dressed and grinning. Forgive me, I didn't realize you had company. Arabella went very still. Thornberry, Count Thornberry. The man, the Count, looked uncomfortable. Miss Hartley, she managed. Arabella Hartley. Miss Hartley. He inclined his head formally. Reginald Ashford, Count of Thornberry. This interrupting fool is my brother, Philip. Delighted, Philip said, looking between them with undisguised interest. Sorry to intrude, but, Reg, we really should— Yes, Reginald said abruptly. Of course, Miss Hartley, it was illuminating. He hesitated, as though he wanted to say more, then turned and walked quickly from the room, his brother following with a curious backward glance. Arabella stood alone among the books, her heart racing. Count Thornberry, the reclusive widower who hadn't attended a social event in 3 years. The man rumored to be so devoted to his scholarly pursuits that he refused all company, and he had discussed astronomy with her as though she were his equal. She touched the spine of the Herschel, catalogue he had left on the chair, still warm from his hands. No nobleman would ever want her, Charlotte had said. But for just a moment, in the moonlit library, she had forgotten to be unwanted. The carriage ride home was mercifully quiet. Uncle Edmund had nodded off immediately, his spectacles sliding down his nose as he snored gently. Arabella stared out the window at the London streets, her mind replaying every moment of her conversation with the Count. He didn't look at me like I was strange, she whispered to her reflection in the glass. But of course, that meant nothing. Men like Reginald Ashford, titled, wealthy, educated, did not pursue women like her. He had probably already forgotten their encounter. It had been merely a pleasant, intellectual diversion for him, nothing more. Arabella, her uncle mumbled, stirring. Did you enjoy the evening? It was educational, she said carefully. Splendid, splendid. Edmund yawned. Did I mention I saw Count Thornberry there? Haven't seen him in society for years. Tragic about his wife. They say she was quite social, always dragging him to events he detested. After she passed, he retreated completely. Can't blame the man, really. Society can be rather exhausting. Arabella absorbed this information silently. So Reginald's reclusiveness had a reason, and his late wife had been his opposite. Social, where he was scholarly. Comfortable, where he was awkward. Like Arabella, he had learned to hide. The carriage stopped before their modest townhouse in a quieter part of Mayfair. As Arabella helped her uncle up the steps, she made herself a promise. She would not allow herself to hope. Hope was what had broken her 5 years ago. Hope was dangerous. But as she prepared for bed and looked out her window at the night sky, she couldn't help tracing the constellations and remembering the genuine interest in Reginald Ashford's gray eyes. Just for tonight, she let herself remember what it felt like to be seen. 3 days later, Arabella was walking through Hyde Park with Uncle Edmund, enjoying the early morning quiet before the fashionable crowds arrived. The summer air was cool and fresh, and for once, she felt almost peaceful. Miss Hartley, she turned to find Reginald Ashford mounted on a striking black horse, looking distinctly uncomfortable in his riding clothes. He dismounted with more haste than grace. Count Thornberry, she said, surprised. Good morning. Yes, good morning. He glanced at Edmund, who was studying a tree with distracted interest. I was hoping I might encounter you. That is, I often ride here in the mornings, and I thought perhaps— He stopped, visibly frustrated with himself. I wanted to apologize for leaving so abruptly the other evening. There's no need to apologize, Arabella said gently. Your brother required your attention. Philip requires attention the way a garden requires rain, constantly and in overwhelming amounts. Reginald smiled slightly. But I was rude nonetheless. Our conversation about the Andromeda Nebula was— It was the most engaging discussion I've had in years. Arabella's heart did a traitorous little flip. I enjoyed it as well. Did you? He looked genuinely pleased. I wondered if perhaps I had bored you with… Reginald, Philip appeared on horseback, looking far too cheerful for the early hour. And Miss Hartley, how fortuitous. I was just telling Reggie we should host a small gathering at our Surrey estate this weekend. Very small, just a few people interested in scientific pursuits. Would you and your uncle care to join us? I understand the Count has quite the telescope collection. Edmund perked up immediately. Telescope collection? My dear boy, we would be delighted. Arabella shot her uncle a warning look, but he was already enthusiastically discussing refractor lenses with Philip. She glanced at Reginald, who looked both pleased and terrified. You needn't feel obligated, she said quietly. I don't, he replied. I want you to see the observatory. I think you would appreciate it. Something in his voice made her look up. His expression was earnest, vulnerable in a way that suggested this was not easy for him. Then we accept, she said softly. His smile transformed his entire face. Saturday, then. I'll send the carriage. As they parted ways, Arabella felt Uncle Edmund's knowing gaze. Don't start, she warned. I said nothing, Edmund replied innocently, though I will note that the Count looked at you the way I look at a particularly fascinating fossil, which, in our world, is quite the compliment. Despite herself, Arabella laughed. Thornbury Estate was magnificent, not in the ostentatious way of most aristocratic homes, but in its quiet dignity. The house sprawled across manicured grounds, with a separate building that Edmund identified immediately as the observatory. My God, her uncle breathed. Is that a dome structure? Arabella, he has a proper rotating dome. Reginald appeared on the front steps, looking more at ease here than he had in London. Welcome to Thornbury. Philip is inside antagonizing the cook, as usual. May I show you the observatory? For the next hour, Arabella existed in a state of near bliss. The observatory was a dream, pristine instruments, detailed star charts covering the walls, and a 6-inch refractor telescope that made her modest equipment look like a child's toy. This is extraordinary, she whispered, running her fingers along the brass fittings. You must be able to see incredible detail. Would you like to try? Reginald adjusted the telescope's position. The sun is setting, but Venus should be visible shortly. They worked in comfortable silence, Arabella making minute adjustments, while Reginald offered suggestions. Uncle Edmund had wandered off with Philip, leaving them alone, the observatory filled with golden afternoon light. May I ask you something? Reginald said suddenly. The other night, in the library, you seemed distressed when you arrived? Arabella kept her eye to the telescope. I overheard some ladies discussing my unmarriageable qualities. It's not an uncommon occurrence. That's unconscionable. It's honest, she corrected, finally looking at him. I am peculiar. I have ink-stained hands, and I wear spectacles, and I would rather discuss nebulae than needlework. I stopped expecting to be seen as a woman years ago. I'm merely a curiosity, an oddity to be tolerated. No, Reginald said fiercely. No, that's not… He moved closer. My wife used to ridicule me, constantly. She said I was boring, that my interests were embarrassing, that no proper gentleman cared about telescopes and dusty books. She would drag me to social events and then mock me afterward for my awkwardness. When she died, I felt guilty for the relief. I've hidden here for 3 years because I was so tired of being made to feel like my passions were shameful. Arabella's throat tightened. Reginald, you don't need to be seen as a woman, Arabella. You already are one, a remarkable one. Anyone who can't recognize that is blind. He reached out, his fingers hovering near her cheek. Your ink-stained hands are beautiful because they show dedication. Your spectacles are beautiful because they help you see the universe clearly. You are not a curiosity. You're extraordinary. She could barely breathe. He was so close, his eyes intense in the fading light. You can't mean that. I've never meant anything more. He leaned closer, and she could feel the warmth of him, smell the faint scent of soap and leather. His lips were inches from hers when suddenly he jerked back. "Forgive me," he said hoarsely. "That was inappropriate. I shouldn't have—" "Reginald, we should return to the house. Philip will wonder where we've gone." He practically fled from the observatory, leaving Arabella standing alone among the star charts, her heart pounding and her mind reeling. The carriage ride back to London the next morning was torture. Reginald was polite, but distant, and Arabella couldn't stop replaying that almost kiss, wondering why he had pulled away. Because he realized his mistake, she thought miserably. Because he remembered that no nobleman would ever truly want her. The rumor reached her 3 days later during afternoon tea with Lady Morton, a distant connection of her uncle's. "My dear Arabella," Lady Morton said, with false sweetness, "I heard the most interesting gossip. Apparently, Count Thornbury has taken you on as some sort of charitable project. How kind of him to try to find you a suitable match, given your situation." Arabella's teacup rattled against the saucer. "I beg your pardon?" "Oh, didn't you know? Lady Marguerite Collingwood mentioned it at her salon. She said the Count feels quite sorry for you and is attempting to introduce you to potential suitors among his acquaintance. Marguerite knows him quite well. They were engaged before he married, you know. She says he's always had a soft heart for lost causes." The words hit like physical blows. A charitable project. Lost causes. "If you'll excuse me," Arabella said, standing on shaking legs. "I'm not feeling well." She barely made it home before the tears came. Of course. Of course it had been too good to be true. Men like Reginald didn't see women like her as romantic prospects. She was a problem to be solved, a cause to support, nothing more. She had been such a fool. The next ball was agony. Arabella attended only because Uncle Edmund insisted, and she spent the evening avoiding the refreshment table, the dancing, and most especially any corner where she might encounter Reginald Ashford. But he found her anyway. "Miss Hartley," he said, appearing at her elbow with uncharacteristic determination, "would you do me the honor of this dance?" "I'm afraid I must decline," she said stiffly, not meeting his eyes. "Arabella, please. You've been avoiding me for days. Have I offended you somehow?" "Not at all, my lord. You've been nothing but kind to your charitable project." He went very still. "What?" "I understand now," she said, humiliation making her voice sharp. "Your interest in me, the observatory visit, all of it. Lady Marguerite explained that you're attempting to help me find a suitable match. It's very generous, truly, but I don't require your pity." "That's not, Arabella, that's complete nonsense. Marguerite is— Please, excuse me." She tried to walk away, but his hand caught her elbow gently. "No," he said quietly. "I will not let you walk away believing that lie. Come with me." "My lord." "Please." Something in his voice made her follow. He led her through the crowd to the terrace doors, into the cool night air. The sounds of the ballroom faded behind them. "What Marguerite told you is malicious fiction," Reginald said, his voice tight with anger. "She and I were briefly engaged 12 years ago. She broke it off when she realized I would never be the social butterfly she desired. She's been attempting to reinsert herself into my life since my wife died, and I have repeatedly declined." "Then why did I pull away in the observatory?" He laughed bitterly. "Because I was terrified, Arabella. Because I spent years being made to feel ridiculous for my interests, for my awkwardness, for being myself. Because the last time I cared for someone, she made me feel like I was fundamentally wrong. And then I met you. And you were brilliant and passionate, and you looked at me like I wasn't broken, and it scared me to death." Arabella stared at him, her anger crumbling. "Reginald, I don't pity you," he said fiercely. "I admire you. I am in awe of you. You continue to pursue what you love despite constant ridicule. You haven't let them break you the way I let them break me. You are the bravest person I know." "I'm not brave," she whispered. "I'm terrified. Every day I'm terrified of being invisible, or worse, of being visible only as a joke. When you pulled away, I thought—" Her voice broke. "I thought you had realized what everyone else already knows, that I'm not worth wanting. God, Arabella." He reached for her hands, cradling them in his. "You're all I think about. When I read about new astronomical discoveries, I imagine discussing them with you. When I look through my telescope, I picture you beside me. You're not invisible to me. You're blinding." A sob escaped her throat. "I don't know how to believe you." "Then let me prove it," he said softly. "Let me show everyone who you are to me. Let me show you." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away. But Arabella didn't move. His lips touched hers gently, questioningly, and she felt something inside her chest crack open. The kiss was tender and careful, tasting of champagne and promise. When they parted, she was crying. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping at her eyes. "I'm not usually so emotional." "You're allowed to feel," Reginald said, brushing a tear from her cheek. "You're allowed to want. You're allowed to be seen, Arabella. Will you let me see you?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Then trust me for 2 more days," he said mysteriously. "I have something planned for the last ball of the season. Will you attend? What are you planning?" He smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something joyful. "You'll see." Reginald found Philip in the study that evening, going through correspondence. "I need your help," Reginald said, without preamble. Philip looked up, surprised. "With what?" "I'm going to propose to Miss Hartley. Publicly, at the Devonshire ball in 2 days." His brother's eyebrows shot up. "Publicly? Reg, you hate public displays." "I do," Reginald agreed. "But Arabella needs to know that I'm not ashamed of her, that I'm proud to love her exactly as she is. And everyone who has ever made her feel less than extraordinary needs to witness it." Philip grinned slowly. "You're serious?" "Completely." "Then let's make sure it's spectacular." The Devonshire Ball was the final grand event of the London season, packed with aristocrats preparing to retreat to their country estates for autumn. Arabella arrived with Uncle Edmund, wearing her best evening gown, a modest blue silk that matched her eyes, and her inevitable spectacles. She had just accepted a glass of champagne when she felt the stares begin. Lady Marguerite stood near the refreshment table, surrounded by her usual admirers, watching Arabella with undisguised disdain. "How sad," Marguerite said, loud enough to carry, "when women develop expectations beyond their station. Some people never learn that illusions must eventually shatter." The words found their mark. Arabella's hand trembled slightly on her glass. She was debating escape when the orchestra abruptly stopped mid-phrase. The ballroom fell silent. Arabella turned toward the disturbance and felt her heart stop. Reginald stood in the center of the dance floor, still in his traveling clothes, as though he had just arrived. Philip stood near the orchestra, grinning like a madman. Every eye in the room fixed on the Count of Thornbury, the reclusive scholar who never made public scenes, who avoided attention as though it were plague. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reginald said, his voice steady despite the slight tension in his shoulders. "Forgive the interruption. I have something I need to say." He turned until his eyes found Arabella's across the crowd. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. "For 3 years," Reginald continued, "I hid from society. I hid because I was made to feel that my passions were embarrassing, that my interests were shameful, that I was somehow fundamentally wrong for preferring books to balls and telescopes to small talk. I let ridicule silence me. I let mockery make me small." He took a step toward Arabella. The crowd parted automatically. "Then I met someone who refused to be made small," he said. "Someone who pursues knowledge despite constant derision. Someone who looks at the universe with wonder and refuses to apologize for her brilliance. Someone whose ink-stained fingers are more beautiful than any perfectly manicured hand because they represent dedication to truth. Someone whose spectacles reveal eyes that see further than most people ever dream of seeing." Arabella felt tears streaming down her face. Around her, she heard gasps, whispers, the rustle of fans. Reginald stopped directly in front of her. "Miss Arabella Hartley," he said softly, just for her, though his voice still carried through the silent ballroom. "You are not peculiar. You are extraordinary. You are not a curiosity. You are a revelation. You are not unmarriageable. You are the only woman I could ever imagine marrying." He knelt before her, producing a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside gleamed a sapphire ring, deep blue and star bright. "The color of the night sky you love so much," he said. "Arabella, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life looking at the stars with you?" The ballroom held its collective breath. Arabella looked down at Reginald, this brilliant, wounded man who had just exposed himself completely, who had faced his deepest fear to prove something to her. "Yes," she whispered. Then, louder, "Yes." The room erupted. Some applauded, some gasped, some, like Lady Marguerite, looked utterly scandalized. But Arabella saw none of it. She saw only Reginald as he stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling slightly. "May I kiss you?" he asked quietly. "Please," she breathed. He kissed her softly, tenderly, there in the middle of the Devonshire ballroom, in front of everyone who had ever called her unmarriageable. When they parted, she was crying and laughing simultaneously. "No nobleman would ever want me," she said, remembering Charlotte's cruel words. "Then it's fortunate," Reginald replied, smiling, "that I've never been particularly good at being a proper nobleman." Uncle Edmund appeared, tears in his own eyes, and embraced them both. Philip bounded over, clapping his brother on the back. "Spectacular," he pronounced. "Absolutely spectacular." As the orchestra resumed and the ball continued, Arabella and Reginald slipped away to the terrace. Above them, stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Are you certain?" Arabella asked quietly. "Society will talk. They'll say you've made a bizarre choice, that I'm beneath you." "They can say whatever they like," Reginald interrupted. "I spent 3 years caring what people thought, and it made me miserable. I'd rather be happy with you and scandalous than proper and alone." She laughed, the sound bright with joy. "When did you become so brave?" "When I realized what I stood to lose." He pulled her closer. "I love you, Arabella. Your brilliant mind, your stubborn persistence, your beautiful hands stained with ink from charting stars. All of it, all of you." "I love you too," she whispered against his chest, "even though you're terrible at small talk and you hide in libraries at parties. Especially because of that, I hope. Especially because of that." They stood together under the emerging stars, and for the first time in her life, Arabella Hartley felt truly, completely seen. 6 months later, the observatory at Thornbury Estate glowed softly in the winter darkness. Inside, Arabella bent over a large sheet of parchment, carefully sketching the spiral structure of the Andromeda Galaxy. Her observations over the past months, using Reginald's superior telescope, had revealed details that Messier's original catalogue had missed entirely. "You're going to ruin your eyes," Reginald said from the doorway, carrying 2 steaming mugs of tea. "Says the man who read by candlelight until 3 o'clock this morning," Arabella replied without looking up. He set the tea beside her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What did I marry? A woman or a celestial map?" "Both, I'm afraid. You knew what you were getting into." "I did indeed." He kissed her temple. "Uncle Edmund sent word that he's arriving Friday with his new collection of fossils. He insists we must see them immediately." "Of course he does." Arabella finally set down her pen and turned in his arms. "Philip wrote that he's bringing Lady Catherine when he visits next month. Do you think it's serious?" "With Philip? Who can tell?" Reginald smiled. "Though I never thought I'd see my brother pursue a woman who prefers botanical studies to dancing. Your influence is spreading." "Good," Arabella said firmly. "The world needs more women who refuse to be made small." "It does," Reginald agreed softly. "Starting with you." She kissed him, tasting tea and promise, and the comfortable love they had built together, a love based on seeing each other clearly, without pretense or shame. "Come," she said, taking his hand. "Venus is setting, but we should be able to see Jupiter and its moons for another hour." They stood together at the telescope, Arabella making observations while Reginald recorded her notes, working in the seamless partnership they had developed. Above them, the winter sky spread vast and glittering, full of mysteries waiting to be discovered, of light traveling across impossible distances, of beauty that most people never bothered to see. But Arabella saw. She had always seen, and now, finally, someone saw her too.